Bienvenue, welcome. Merci et bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation with Pedro Tarak about elevating the purpose of regions and international trade to serve the common good. My name is Kate McKenzie. I'm your moderator this morning, and I am so happy to be here in France. My home is in Canada on Treaty 7 in the Indigenous Blackfoot territory in the city of Calgary. I'm the principal consultant at ILA Consulting, and I work with organizations and people to unlock growth. When I'm not doing that, I am also the co-director of the Secret Marathon film. We'll be premiering this film tomorrow, here in France. I'm very excited to have you be able to see that. And I am also the director and founder of Secret 3K, which is a run-walk series that takes place in 27 countries around the world to encourage gender equality. I'm joined today by Pedro Tarak, my new friend. And he is joining us from Buenos Aires and Patagonia. Pedro Tarak is the co-founder of Sistema B, a movement dedicated to advancing B corporations and favorable ecosystems for economic transition across Latin America. Pedro is also co-founder of RITA, the Regional Impact Trade Alliance, incorporated in Melbourne. He's the co-founder of Impact Trade in Santiago, and an investor in several other impact companies such as Guayaki, a regenerative organic yerba mate energy drink sold primarily in the US and Canada. He is a trustee of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and a counselor of the World Future Council. Please help me in welcoming him. So today we will be using Slido for questions. So please take a moment. There will be a screen coming up here, there we go, where you can scan the QR code or go to slido.com and type in 1718967 1718967 if you need to join us there. Before I dive into big questions for Pedro, I want to take a moment for our audience to get to know you. Our theme for the conference is offbeat or contretemps. So I had a couple of questions for Pedro about this. If you could have dinner with one historical figure known for being offbeat or contretemps, who would it be, Pedro? Oh, other way. There you go.
Thank you very much for that question, and great to be here with you. I always think of our ancestors. So first of all, let's honor the ancestors who were here before. Your grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, they're all, shared with the entire world. And one of our ancestors was Socrates. And he would be the kind of person with whom I would be having an amazing conversation. And why? Because he had made so many questions. And that's what I love today. And if you think about it, he was, raising the questions in the market.
Yes.
Not in the Acropolis, not in politics, not where the power was, but where people were doing their exchanges. And that's what really drives me as a person, to enhance the potential that markets have for exchanges, for integration, for value creation, doing business, creating solutions. And that's the source for me.
I love that. We're going to have a lot of good conversation if you like questions like Socrates. So I have one other question for you. What is one unconventional place or activity that inspires your creativity, Pedro?
Well, if I have to choose one, in my case, it's a mountainous environment in an indigenous town surrounded by mountains, it's 2,300 meters above sea level in the northwest of Argentina. It's Andean. And I go there every first Thursday of September and stay after lunch on Sundays, and we meet people without knowing why. We just meet. We just gather for conversations. People from anywhere in the world. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody convenes. Just imagine going to a place without knowing why you go. Just imagine not knowing the agenda. Just imagine not having to pay. Just imagine nobody convening. Just imagine.
It's like a blind date, really.
Exactly. Just imagine not having to report back. And just go and trust. And guess what happens there?
Tell me.
You raise your hand and you say, I want to speak about this. And that will resonate with 20, 60, 100 people who are in the market square. And that group goes up to the mountains, finds a little gorge, and has that conversation. Another person might say another thing. And it can go like economic transition, investment returns, or life after death, whatever.
All different topics.
Exactly. But you do have to abide with 3 self-observation principles. 1, the value of togetherness above the value of agreement. 2,
togetherness over agreement.
Yes, as a value, which derives from what we see from the earth. I mean, we're together anyway. See? Second principle, you commit to the use of the sharing energy, this one here. And you try to avoid this energy, the one of the head. And the third principle, you seriously engage in the quality of the conversation. There's no one else who will be your judge. It's all building up the self-observation while you're having the conversation. Now, the number of results that you get ex post without having thought of them are huge. Companies that have been built, obviously they're holistic and impact-driven because you interact with the people who have to do with that. 2, funds that have been created, impact funds. 3, marriages. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can relate. When you were telling me this idea, I was thinking, as you know, Pedro, I've been married now for 10 years. And I think the only reason that we've been married for 10 years is because we committed to keep having conversations, even when we disagree. So I like your first principle, right? Committing to the conversation, even if you don't agree.
That's lovely. Yes. And for example, how many of you know, why don't you stand up? How many people know about B Corps? Just stand up.
Anyone familiar with B Corp?
B Corp?
This is your chance to stand up, stretch your legs for a second.
Okay, there's a stand here that says B Corp. And for anyone who would be interested, it's a new business identity, and it operates with a different system of doing good with a purpose of doing good or having an impact on society and the environment while actually we make money, profits. It's an identity that helps us measure the impact of the company. Just like we measure financial results, we also measure the other results. And you compete from that position. It's a new business sector. Anyway, the B Corp community of Caracas was born there because there were some people from Caracas in that gathering, but nobody knew that they were going to be there. And there were some people who were from the B Corp world, from other countries, and that's what happened. So you're all welcome, but nobody invites. So you have the full right to be there. And you can speak whatever language that suddenly there's a group of people who will be doing, the translations naturally.
So I love this. You're taking some inspiration from what you were experiencing in this indigenous pocket in the Andean area. Tell me a little bit more about the inspiration for RITA, for this trade alliance, and the purpose of regions and international trade, how they can come together to serve the common good. Because I want to hear about some of that inspiration. You know, maybe you can tell me too a little bit about the example of Guayaquil and how that connects there too.
Yes, thank you. Personally, I'm a small investor in a company that responded to a problem, and that's the deforestation. I would say the elimination of ecosystems, natural ecosystems. The second largest tropical forest of the Americas was the Atlantic forest following the Amazon. Now there's only 7.8% left. That means that the life systems of the ecosystem have been reduced because of single crops and deforestation, mostly because of soy and other wheat and other grains, right? In Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. So Guayaquil was founded by an Argentine who said, just as it went away, it can come back if we get organized. So he started with 2 US Californian friends, this company whose purpose is to basically make the forest come back with the yerba mate. Who knows about yerba mate? Raise your...
Oh, we've got some yerba mate fans here. Okay.
Right, so that's the alternative to coffee, right? So, so the company actually pays from 40 to 60% more to indigenous suppliers or the cooperatives, the landless movement cooperatives in Brazil, and as long as they harvest the yerba mate leaves from standing trees.
Right.
And those leaves become the ingredient of the main drink. And of course, you can drink the mate as we drink it, you know, in gourds, and we have these ceremonies. But you can also drink the mate as part of a competing beverage to the brands like Red Bull.
Right,
yes?
as a ready-made experience. I think that's so interesting, Pedro, because that example of Guayaquil is showing us, you know, how can we use business for that common good, but I can see how that would expand across to international trade. We have a question from the audience, and I will encourage people that if you do have a question, please, you can use the Slido link to be able to submit any more questions. But one of our questions that came in is, international trade and common good, are they compatible?
That's
I think this is a good question after what we've just been talking about.
Yes. Well, international trade, I mean, trade was the reason for which we started with exchanges, and its purpose was peace building. So that was the original purpose. Now, the kind of international trade that we know today, or we basically live through today, has no purpose. And all the discussions have to do with either free trade or protected or regulated trade. So the whole idea that we are seeing happening from regions, and now I'll go back to the region, is that how to grant purpose, elevate the purpose of the international trade exchanges. So what started to happen was that in the case of Guayaquil, of course, it has to do with the regeneration of forests, but the products going to North America. That's the way it started. It happened 20 years ago. But now what we're seeing is the emergence of regions that do have trade, but they want to be regions known for doing good for the world and the planet. So just imagine the best Lille for the world. Just imagine connecting to the best Mendoza for the world.
I mean, tell me more about, like, why does this need to happen now, Pedro? Like you said, we need more regions, we need more players. Tell me more about that piece.
Well, as we all know, we only have 197 nation states, and we're seeing that the way we've organized ourselves is not enough to meet the kind of the scale of societal demands that we have today. Call them, I mean, mostly in the northern part of the world, we will be speaking about climate, biodiversity, but we also speak about how to, reduce inequality, and also how to reduce poverty in many places. And inequality has a lot to do globally. I mean, it's between ourselves. Now, what started to happen is that more and more regions start to say, hey, we need to reorganize ourselves inside, doing good for the world. So committing concretely, like for example, in Mendoza, you have the climate pact, but rather than being only signed by the governments, the municipal and the provincial government, it's signed by all the chambers of industry and commerce, with the exception of oil, gas, naturally, but also the universities and the different local and provincial governments, all having the same commitment with concrete accountability, mutual accountability systems, mechanisms. Now, once you see that, and then you see that they're also pioneers of the economic innovation, like all the local governments and the provincial governments adopting the sustainable impact procurement regime, that if you want to sell to the governments, you have to meet the SDGs,
yes,
the Sustainable Development Goals, just to be a provider. And also, you have to create the mechanisms for multi-stakeholder and multi-ideological groups, so the left and the right, to come back together to overcome polarization. This means convergence and really elevate the purpose of being together in a concrete place. Now, this you can do much better at the regional level. So how do we reward those regions? Is it with other regions? So, because then we can have the same identity. For those from Northern Europe, you might still have in your memory the Hansa League, the Hanseatic League. It's like city to city. So this is something that we're seeing as emerging, is the combination of the city to city, the Hanseatic League, with the denomination of provenance. So regional impact of origin. So these regions can have the same kind of branding, and have the possibility to identify each other because of minimum verification conditions.
And I want to get into some more examples, and we'll get there in a second, but I think, I love what you're saying here about rewarding the businesses based on how we're putting in some of this impact assessment. I see that in my own city of Calgary. I see where, our city has put in certain standards and rewards businesses, for example, if they are, if they have Indigenous owners, for example, right? We're giving a higher rating and ranking for those businesses, right? And so I see the difference, but I also hear what you're saying about those regions having those commonalities, like even yourself and myself, right? You coming from Patagonia, myself coming from near to the Rocky Mountains in Canada, we have similarities just based on our geography and on our mentality that we could find an alignment, right? So I think that's really interesting. But I hear this piece around that regions can overcome polarization. And I have to ask you a bit of a challenging question, because I see in my own country, even in Canada, we are having polarization often in our politics. We're seeing people becoming, there's more and more populism. We're seeing more and more political polarization. How do you see this? How do you see us moving past those kinds of issues with what you're speaking about, with connecting regions, connecting territories?
Well, first of all, the most powerful way of having transformative connections is through trade. It's the most numerous of all human decisions on a daily basis. By trade, I mean commercial exchanges. Every day, here, you buy a ticket, whatever. We're trading all the time. So that's one element which actually one can see similarly from region to region. When you start identify yourself start seeing, hey, but these guys in the northern part of the state of Rio, Baixada Fluminense, they're doing more or less the same. They're having the same kind of aspirations. We might want to do something, you see? Or then suddenly, the guys from Melbourne, you see, in Australia, why on earth would the Mendocinos be related to the Melbournians? I don't know how you call them. But anyway, but that's what happened. So multi-actoral groups started to have conversations between both regions. And then they realized that they competed. So in wine, in technology, and in water management, so they said, hey, is this going to be the reason for which we're not going to be sticking together? So both went together to Umbria, right? Because they were invited. And in Umbria, Italy. But in Umbria, they're very, very close to Tuscany. I mean, they're right there. So this logic inspired the valley, the upper valley of the Tiber River, Tibero, and the organization, Fondazione Valtiberina, decided to promote the integration of the valley for regeneration. And now you see the municipalities of both regions starting to converge in the same objective of doing good for the world. Now, doing good for the world also does good for yourself. It's not something that you have to separate. It does good for business. It does good for investments. Now, let's go to the mechanisms of overcoming polarization.
Yeah, how do we do that? Like, because I hear what you're saying. Part of it I'm hearing is they're having a shared common purpose, but like, okay, that's great and all, right? You and I could have the shared common purpose of going to get coffee, but that's not necessarily going to keep us from being nonpartisan. So tell me more.
Okay, I'm sure that in each place, once you decide that you want to have an economic driver to overcome polarization, people will look differently.
What happened in Mendoza? Like,
okay.
tell me about Mendoza, because I'm interested. How did they start having these conversations there to overcome the polarization?
Sure. So what happened is that they created the mechanisms, hubs of economic innovation, where you have the left and the right, and all the rich and the poor, the vulnerable and the included, all together, right? And for example, they were the ones who actually prepared the drafts of the impact procurement regimes. And that's what went next to the local parliaments and to the provincial parliaments. So everything was cooked as human beings, because at the local level, your kids go to school together. At the local level, you play football together. You see, you're in the same teams. So there's no left and right when you're a team player, you see. So that's where you build the trust and the sense of togetherness and the sense of convergence. So what happened in Mendoza actually inspired other places. So for example, in Uruguay, you have the National Roundtable for Impact Economy. Again, with the export associations, with the B Corp communities, with all the universities. And in Uruguay, you have the left and the right always respecting each other, you see. So it's also rebuilding the culture of diversity producing value, you see. So, and that will resonate throughout the world, because who likes to be separated? Who likes to be separated? Who loves polarization in this world? Just raise your hand if you like to be polarized. Nobody likes polarization as human beings. I don't want to be, you know.
We want to be together.
Right. In South America, we always refer to Tupac Amaru, an Inca guy who was, how do you say that, Leonardo?
Like torn apart?
Torn apart, yeah, it has a word. But anyway, nobody likes to be torn apart. So why should we be torn apart as collective bodies?
So when these groups are coming together, you gave us a couple of different examples. Are they still holding to those same principles you talked about at the beginning, like holding to the principle of asking these questions and allowing space for those questions?
What happened in the case of Mendoza is that during 18 months, everybody leaders from all the sectors, from the prisons, the hospitals, the business, the small business, the medium-sized business, some large businesses, the investment world, all the political parties, the governments, the local, the provincial, I mean, just you name it. They went through an initiative which is called the equivalent to Mendoza Can Be. And actually, Leonardo is one of the founders of Cities Can Be, which started in Rio de Janeiro, and the people from Mendoza were inspired by the people from Rio. During 18 months, the questionnaire to actually become a B Corp, or just to go through the measurement procedure.
Like the business,
That
business
was,
assessment.
Exactly. That business assessment, holistic business assessment, was undergone by everybody. Now, the questions, Socratic questions relating to how you deal with your collaborators, the suppliers, all the communities, the clients, the
gender, all of
everything.
There are tough questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That stayed in the minds of the top leadership of the province. And the most relevant result was that most of the players in the province suddenly realized that there was a new space to create public solutions, which were market-driven. Before it was only, the scale you would only reach through politics, left or right. But this time it's, wow, we can all be innovators of the market organizations, business, investments, also market instruments, procurement, measurement of the economy locally. In fact, there's a left-right team working on the integrated GDP, or
integrated GDP.
The sovereign bonds, how to actually have holistic sovereign bonds, and that's what created, for example, the national university that 80% of the professionals graduate from that university. Today they have you can become an impact business manager because, of course, you have lots of businesses that are, going in that direction. So, and of course, once you start enjoying, this thing about, yes, I know you're left, but our kids are friends. Let's go for an asado. You see, it's a complete, something new happens, you see. So I would say that, may I share one dream?
Yes.
Yeah. This is happening not because of us. This is happening because of natural need to get back together and do business with those who are feeling the same, and that we feel between the regions. These can be cities, they can be provinces, regiones, they can be, departments, they can be counties, small nations. Everywhere where there's an identity that can be recovered, the feeling of belonging. When you do trade, you actually are trading values. You trade your identity, your creativity, the value that you put to the world.
Absolutely.
And it's, region to region. So basically, it's, this is emerging. So the only thing that we're doing with RITA is to accompany those potential impact trade regions in connecting and co-creating together, in building the brand, regional impact of origin, in creating the minimum verification conditions or standards, in basically creating the systems, the technological platforms for the regions, for these multi-actoral players of regions to meet and have direct relationships, in creating the systems to meet in situ and for the regions that are there already, but also to offer the possibility to other regions to sort of hook in. So it's that.
You're facilitating something that you're already seen as being a natural piece. And I understand, I mean, even with my own businesses, I've often sought out people that had shared values, and that's where you have the best trade. That's where you have the best partnerships. And I've worked with folks that are in Australia or Afghanistan or whichever, right? But you find those shared values. And what I hear RITA doing is really helping people to find those shared values, find that shared purpose, and then you're kind of adding some fuel to that fire, right? I'm going to just invite you, if the technical team could put the Slido piece back on the screen. If anyone does have a question, please submit your question, and we'll keep answering some more questions from the audience. I'm curious to know, Pedro, a little bit more about some of the success that you're seeing. I mean, you've mentioned areas like Mendoza, Uruguay, the North Valley of the Tiber, right? Tell me, where are you seeing some success here as you're bringing about what's happening with RITA?
Well, yes. I hate to say it has something to do with me. I mean, success for the world, it's not me. All right. So what's happening is that, for example, the people from Aboca, which is a B Corp, it's a health product company in Tuscany and Umbria, they met the people from the upper valley of Baixada Fluminense, and that's those are the valleys that run into the Bahia de Guanabara in the state of Rio, and the need in the Brazilian side was to regenerate the Atlantic forest as well, with inclusion, with equality, you see. So what happened was that these guys in Italy, they needed acerola. I don't know how you say acerola. Acerola.
It's like a berry.
Yeah, but regenerative acerola, the regenerative berry. So what today you have is an investment of acerola production from this Umbrian company in the Fluminense area, together with Madre Frutos, and they have an agreement, a concrete contract to buy, that production. It's a long-term agreement, so it's the production that is measured according to the need of the good for the, medicine and the health products, and at the same time, the expansion of the forest back to nature. You see, so it's the production that creates nature again, or not creates nature.
Regenerates.
Regenerates the ecosystem at the same time. So that's, for example, the kind of, I'm not sure if you could call it a success at this point, because we still need 5 years to see the production going, and it has to be decarbonized. These are very, very strict companies, and so it has to be net zero, and of course it has to be inclusive, so many standards in the contract.
Still more work to go, but I mean, you've seen this before with Sistema Bay, right? You saw how it starts with one example and the momentum builds. Can you tell me too, you had some success in the area of wine as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know if you know about the regenerative wine production. It's organic plus regenerative of the soil and of the biodiversity and of water basins. You also have regenerative beer production. All this you do have in Mendoza, right? Mendoza is one of the big wine regions of Argentina. You might have heard of Malbec, yeah?
It's one of my favorites.
I know that they compete with the wine in France, but they're still good. But anyway, there's a big movement called Wines of Argentina. It's a huge association of wineries that have gone through the B impact assessment massively in several moments. So they're innovating the way that they're doing business. And what has emerged in Mendoza is a new sector that goes beyond organic wine, which is the regenerative wine, right? So, and they measure in numbers of species that come back. It's very, very concrete. Now, what happened is that there was an activity in Pretoria in South Africa, and that's where we met with the people from Wines of South Africa. And suddenly the conversation was elevated because of the purpose, you see? So rather than this whole logic of competing, I mean, this is what comes from the economic system. If I'm going to live, you're not going to live. This is with all respect to our friends from US, this thing, with all respect, but, one thing that I'm seeing is that it's a logic that in the long term, it doesn't succeed because putting walls, protecting yourself when we're interdependent, where our life depends on the life services that you produce on the other end. You know, so what happened with the South Africans was a conversation, basically, to start saying, hey, let's not compete to exclude ourselves. Let's compete for the world. So what if, that's very, very recent. What if we go to fairs together, fairs, right? Yeah, fairs
like
together.
fairs, markets, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we show jointly the regenerative wines. Rather than, you know,
Love
saying,
that.
yeah, but regenerative wine production in South Africa and in Argentina together is good for the world. And of course, you lower down the costs, and it becomes much more efficient in your, you know.
You're sharing the costs of your trade booths, you're sharing
Right.
and I think also then demonstrating that there's an actual market there for those regenerative wines. It's not just one region producing them. There's multiple regions. We've got another question here from the audience that kind of relates to this, and thank you to those that are submitting your questions. You can also upvote a question if you really like it. They're saying impactful projects struggle to scale. What are your strategies for ensuring that local innovations can inspire global change while staying true to their roots?
Well, we don't have those strategies to start with. Again, I mean, depends on my experience as an investor in Guayaquil has to do with how you become the example of the world you want to see, right? So today, Guayaquil's, you know, shade-grown mate production, it has been imitated by 20% of the production of the entire province of Misiones. So one company can have, you know, an impact with its own, you know, core values and identity on many others. Now, the most powerful way of doing it is harnessing the opportunities of the markets, because that's where, you know, people say, hey, these guys are having access to markets. These guys are doing well, even if it's more expensive. You know, they're finding ways of lowering down the cost of publicity, advertisement. And that's where we compete, actually, right? Because we don't, you know, we don't advertise as the other companies do. So, because you innovate the way you get organized as business to be able to compete with the same prices, right? So, today, I would say that once you start having one company, then you start seeing other companies following suit, and then you start becoming a sector, and you have a collective voice. And that collective voice is very powerful throughout the world.
It seems to me, though, too, that like RITA is playing a bit of a role in helping these companies to scale. And I see that as part of yourself also sharing those examples. Like you shared an example with me from Basque of something that you had seen there working well. Maybe can you speak to that a little? Yeah, you were at the market there. Yeah, maybe just speak to that a little bit, because I think that's very local to that space, but it gives ideas to other areas as to how they might scale that as well, right?
Yeah. I always say that personally, I'm like a troubadour. I love listening to stories and taking the stories somewhere else to see if that inspires. You know, basically, we're storytellers, aren't we? I mean, we are all storytellers among ourselves, and that was our route of communication. And before, we had the troubadours going from one town to another, yes, and that was their role. So today, you need systems because, you know, the level of complexity. Now, what has happened is that we had some workshops about the potential of RITA in the Basque region and also in other regions, in Greece and also the Aragon. And when I was in the Basque region with people from the province of Guipúzcoa, San Sebastián, they showed an amazing project, which is an impact, completely circular shopping center. Shopping center. The entire commercial center being circular, net zero.
So cool.
Sorry?
It's so cool to have it all be regenerative,
Yeah, and in all, basically in food, in textiles, and in furnitures. A huge shopping center that its construction will start in January, and I think it's bound to finish in 2026. Now, what's unique is that at the same time, it integrates the opportunities of education for people. This is a huge shopping center. I mean, with brands and just like any other big shopping center. It's not for, social entrepreneurs, if it could include them, but it's not that logic. You see, very fancy. And so it's going to be perhaps the first of that kind of shopping center in Europe. So just imagine what I did. At that same moment, I took the picture of the, how do you call it, the render?
Yeah, the examples and
the plan.
The renderings, the draft, yeah.
Exactly. And I just sent it to my friends in Latin America, like saying, hey, with their authorization. Huh? So and I said, hey, this is a big business. This is a great business. For whom? For those who actually build shopping centers. And everybody wants to be in the pioneering phase. And so just imagine a shopping center where you have the experience of actually, perhaps you do the shopping, perhaps you don't, but you actually become part of an educational experience with families, and then you can speak about this to others. You see, what you learned from different brands. So, so that's part of what RITA hopes to facilitate more than anything else, right?
And I think that it really does speak to this idea of we need, and I'm speaking all of us collectively here, we have a bit of a responsibility to also share those ideas, right? That we can't just rely on RITA to scale things. I think there's an opportunity here at the World Forum. We're hearing great examples. How do we take those examples back to our own communities? Certainly, I want to share these ideas back in Canada, but how do we bring these ideas back? I have another question from the audience where they're saying, Europeans often feel that they are being stuck with regulations and norms which are severely refraining initiatives for common good. Any ideas? How do we tackle this? How do we tackle that there's a lot of, of these regulations that could keep us from doing the common good? Thoughts around that, Pedro?
Well, yes. As you well know, there's a concrete tension between the Mercosur member countries and the EU, particularly because of the French farmers, right? And I fully understand that. I mean, fair competition requires, the same standards for all parties. Personally, I'm there. At the same time, we need the place where we need to understand each other because we belong to the same world. And guess what? In those 4 countries, you also have, people who do regeneration that overperform the European standards, and they want to compete with better standards than the European. And you have that as well. How do we do the discerning? Now, if we stay at the national level, there's no way that we will understand each other because it's, we simplify the relationship and the complexity. So once you go down, it's the lead with a small nation like Uruguay, it's with with different regions in South America that we can talk to each other and mutually build the trust to find the solutions. Now, of course, the nation states are the ones who actually do the rule making. Now, what regions can do is facilitate the implementation or the enforcement in practice. They can become, knowledge loops, like a feeding loop into the concrete implementation. Thirdly, we can build the trust between suppliers and buyers. But it's not only in one direction; it's both directions. So it's the industry of Lille, perhaps deciding that they want to actually provide goods on that other end. Lithium is there. The battery, the production will be here. You see, so there's so much that we can talk to each other. Now, the best way of doing it is person to person, becoming partners. And that's when we start understanding each other. Because otherwise, once you go to the upper levels, then it's too far away to understand the entire world. Now, if you have trade between impact regions, we have the same logic. We have the same search. And trust building is crucial in this moment of wall buildings.
I appreciate you going there, because there's one other question that we won't totally have time for here, but I want to just address it quickly, which is around this idea that, you know, trade can be very much tied to capitalism, right? And there's a question of, is that consistent with the common good, right? But what I hear you saying here too is this idea that where we started from, right, of that we have to come together, have these conversations, and it's through the conversation, through asking these difficult questions, that we're going to be able to keep answering difficult questions like this as well, right? As to how do we keep that common good top of mind. Pedro, I want to bring back the last chance for you to share how, if people are wanting to learn more about RITA, if they're wanting to get involved individually, personally, leave us with a thought as to what can they do, what's your recommendation for how they get involved?
Well, first of all is to get organized in groups and organizations, just like in other places in the world. You know, organizations like Réseau Alliance have the equivalent, have decided to partner with other partners in different parts of the world. So these are the ones who actually promote this shift. So individuals can join the Réseau Alliances for having their own regions. I don't know if it's starting this pathway, but it's a pathway that we're exploring together. And of course, nobody knows if it's going to succeed. You see, who knows the future? But one thing I know for sure, capitalism, the way we've seen it, is not working any longer. We need to evolve so we can embed the solutions inside the system. So this applies for trade. The international trade that we see today is not being useful for humanity and the planet. So we need to evolve. It's not trade is bad. We can have turnkey projects, which is trade as well. So that doesn't mean the shifting from one place to another. So there's so much that we can invent, you see, and it's time for innovation in our relationships. But we do definitely belong to the same planet. We have a shared unit, and we have a shared destiny. And my sense is that it's time to get together in the most powerful of our possibilities, which is commerce. You see, relating, exchanging. So that's...
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you to everyone for sharing your time and your questions. Really appreciate it. And you've left us much to reflect on. Let's give Pedro one more round of applause.